All right, this is Andy McNeill, and this is another episode of Free Arkansas. And today I've got Jeff Amerine with me, and we're going to talk about entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship can help Arkansas and what it's like to be an entrepreneur and how to invest with entrepreneurs. Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so, Jeff, you've done all sorts of things with entrepreneurs, and I'm going to go through a little of your resume, but I'd love for you to elaborate on it. You've taught for a decade plus related to the topic. You've consulted. You've run, and I guess I don't know if it's an incubator, but with Innovation Junkie. Can you just give us a little background on all the things you've done?
Yeah, happy to. So I guess foundationally, I was a military guy, Naval Academy, and then took my commission in the Air Force. And along the way after that, 3 Fortune 500s and executive level roles in transportation, telecom, and software, and then 9 startups. So did some kind of really early pioneering work in international telecommunications when that was being revolutionized and opened up, kind of precursor of voice over IP. Did some stuff in mobile middleware, prepaid cellular, putting in telecom shots between the U.S. and emerging markets like India, a variety of things like that. Stood up a joint venture between Deutsche Telekom and SAIC for strategic consultancy that figured out how to bring new technologies into the U.S. and get them market ready. And then spent about 7 years at the University of Arkansas running the technology venture group, which is all about technology transfer and technology commercialization. Along the way, I was an adjunct in the Walton College teaching new ventures. Accidental business I never intended to start in 2008 is the Startup Junkie business model. We're one of the largest entrepreneurial support organizations in the central U.S. and originally started out as a sort of ad hoc side hustle when I was at the U of A. The Arkansas Economic Development Commission had started this program called Innovate Arkansas. They let a contract to Winrock International. They had a couple of former Stevens guys that were really good and transactional and very smart guys, but they didn't have any operators. And so I got pulled into that as kind of a side hustle to help with the mentoring and counseling and helping some of these new tech-based startups starting in 2008, really. And that led to one thing to another where there was a need to build more depth in Northwest Arkansas, and got some funding from a variety of sources, federal, state, university related, foundation related. And this weird business model where all the services are completely free has lasted now for coming up on 18 years. And you think about what we do as a little bit of McKinsey consulting and a little bit of event management. And along the way too, if you think about the 4 pillars of a venture ecosystem, where you got to have talent, access to capital, reinforcement of entrepreneurial culture, and then community, institutional, flagship enterprise engagement. We sort of built the story around that and have been doing a lot of services now statewide for a bunch of years. The Arise program, which is what replaced Innovate Arkansas, 75 Strong, which is to take the toolkit that we've got in the book, creating Startup Junkies, and spreading it kind of statewide, and a whole variety of other things as well. But that's Excellent. It. Serial entrepreneur by affliction, and I guess coach and teacher maybe innately.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, but because I'm similar, although I want to get into some of the differences, because I think that we'll find that your startup and entrepreneurship is different than mine, and I'll explain why I think that. But before I dive into all that, I want to see if you agree with this, or maybe I'll let you kind of roll with it first, and then I'll tell you what I think. I think that growth and creating, jobs in Arkansas, really anywhere, but because I'm an Arkansan, I think Arkansas, it's like an arms race. I think it's super important. And so do you have a view about why you think that's important, if you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical, right? It's critical that all the stats, and this is part of what we use in our justification, something like between 85% and 100%, depending on whose data you believe, of all net new job creation in the last 25 years has come from startups. Large businesses tend to get to a point where they stale on growth, or they're going to grow in another area, or they're going to go multinational. Startups and small businesses are the growth engines. So it's really important to have that large top of funnel, people starting new businesses, scalable businesses, high wage rate businesses. 99% of everyone is employed by a small business. 99% of all employers are small businesses or startups, and half of everyone is employed by those types of firms. So we got to have it. We got to have it. We got to have it on a regular and ongoing cadence because the failure rate is high. And part of what we try to help them avoid the things that typically trip up early stage businesses.
So let me add a few things, see what you think about this, because I definitely agree with you. I think that if we're thinking about prosperity in general and kind of a path to prosperity, I view it as, these creating jobs predominantly through startups and entrepreneurs. And just a few more things that I'd layer onto that. So if we go back into the 90s, I think there was just a little less than 10,000 publicly traded companies. It is probably a little less than 9,000, but today it's like 2,500. And so, of course, it's much more difficult to be a publicly traded company for a variety of reasons, cost of them being one of them, risk being another one. And so, like you mentioned earlier, the ability to get capital is huge and important, and you no longer can just turn to the public markets with small, startups, except for maybe in a few certain types of businesses, so if you're super techie and it's got massive growth potential, maybe that's an exception. And then I would look, when I look at the state of Arkansas, we generated right around $150 million, 150 billion of GDP last year. That puts us in like the 36, 37, something like that in terms of all the states. On a per capita basis, though, we're 48th, and so, and just to sort of put that in like perspective, Texas is 18 times that size. Every state around us but Mississippi is at least 2 times or close to it. Walmart itself last year did $600 billion in revenue. So Walmart is like, 4 Arkansas. It's just in terms of economic activity. So one of the things that I think is that we've got a lot at stake in order to drive economic activity. Sometimes I just think, wow, we teach kids like calculus when they're a freshman, but they just don't know anything about starting a business or how to put things together. Does that resonate with you, or am I just stretching it a little bit?
No. Listen, it's 100% right. And even though we are a low population state of 3.2 million, and we do have these pockets that are red hot, like Northwest Arkansas, and the defense sector is going to get hot. And what's happening in the lithium cluster and Smackover has potential, and the building around the steel infrastructure in East Arkansas, all those things are great possibilities. But entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial thinking has to be infused in K through 12. We did some things, the governor did some things a few years back with computer science training. That's great. But we got to get them thinking like entrepreneurs in grade school and beyond. We got to catch them early on to not necessarily be trained just to be a good employee, but somebody that can take an entrepreneurial initiative and actually create something. Whether or not they ever actually create their own business, we need people like that in every industry, in every nonprofit organization, that are going to see a problem and figure out how to solve a problem. Now, to that point, there are good organizations that have coverage here, like the Young Entrepreneurs Institute, came out of Ohio, funded by the Walton Family Foundation. They're doing a lot of stuff to try to train up the teachers on entrepreneurial thinking, on Lean Canvas, on all these tools to get them to infuse it in the kids. But we got to do it. It's essential. It's the one thing that I would say as a nation differentiates us from everywhere else in the world, with maybe a couple of exceptions. Israel and South Korea come to mind, but just about everywhere else, we've got an advantage because we do think as a nation entrepreneurially, and we do so more in pockets in this country than in others. Some people are just kind of waiting on the next manufacturer to be dropped on them. We need to infuse that into everything we do, I think.
So tell me the story, tell me your first, because I stepped into being an entrepreneur in a happenstance sort of way, when I was a little older than 30. And how did it happen for you, where you felt like, okay, this is the first time I'm really got the ball?
Yeah. And I think a little bit of context is helpful. I come from a multi-generational military family back to before the Revolutionary War. My dad was a career Air Force guy, World War II, Korea and Vietnam, a multi-engine pilot. My brother served, my sister served, my brother-in-law served. That was the family business, serving the military. And when I got a chance to go to a service academy, I did, and I thought that's going to be the career path. Well, I was also somebody that didn't get to do what I wanted to do. I didn't have good enough eyesight to fly. I went into special operations after I was a missile launch officer, which is a whole other story, blew out my knees. And so my pathway to industry was research and development, acquisition, project management. That's what led me to Westinghouse, system engineering, product line, project management roles. Long story short, I took a new ventures class in a graduate program, and that was kind of an aha moment. I'd never really seriously thought about starting my own thing until I took that class, and I said, this is something that scratches that sort of nonconformist itch. Everybody else is going left, I'm going right mindset that I've always kind of had. And that was what really catalyzed me thinking someday, it was an MBA class, I want to do it myself. And so after spending a few years at Westinghouse, getting some international business experience, working on projects, I thought this is something I can go do. And so the first thing I did was launch a consulting company with a lot of the clients and relationships I'd made while I was at Westinghouse, doing mostly business development related stuff. And along the way, I found a technology, and I thought I can build an operating company around that. Really bad assumption. I was
what was it called?
Nowhere near prepared to do it. And I was about the same age, early 30s, when I took that leap, and was woefully unprepared for what came next.
Yeah, so it's, I ended up meeting a couple guys that were a little older than me, and what they really wanted is someone to run their company because they thought they were going to sell it. And so these guys, I had literally no business running this company. When I look back on it, I mean, I was assertive. I believed that I could run the company, but I didn't have any experience at all. Yep. Zero. Yeah. And they let me do it. And then, of course it grew. And then, and we did one little thing. I'll give you a quick story, and then I want to hear one of your stories. So we noticed in the Fayetteville Shale, and this is, 25 years ago, the increase in the 100-barrel steel trailers running down central Arkansas. And so for $10,000, we went and bought an old producing well from a guy. We gave it to his Boy Scout troop, and we started a business doing saltwater disposal of fracking fluids. Mm-hmm. And I still remember, we put this money up, we redo the well, and we're going into Seco is what we called it, but they were, Southwest Energy. And I didn't even know how to price this. And so I remember rolling in, we were debating the price before we went into the conference room, and, sure enough, whatever we did, it worked. And, they ended up using us. But it's an example of wow, it just we took a risk and it worked. Is that how you felt when you did this consulting business?
Well, yeah. I mean, the one thing that I did that was smart in that very beginning in the consulting business before I got into an operating company, which is a whole nother level of complication, was I had essentially a backlog of revenue. I mean, I had contracts as I was walking out the door, not on any kind of conflicting basis. It wasn't anything that Westinghouse was doing. It was going to be completely different stuff. But I got revenues out in front of expenses, and that was something that, looking back on, was a wise thing to do.
Yeah.
The operating company, where we are actually in the business as an FCC licensed international carrier, that was all a ton of front-end expense, a ton of marketing work, a ton of building international relationships. It was a little bit capital intensive. That was a completely different thing. And that's where I figured out how to spend money on the wrong things, how to hire the wrong people, how to make all those kind of stupid operator mistakes that haven't made sense. It was. So
what years are we talking about in the 90s?
That would have been 95, 96, 97, 98, 99.
And were these successful after a few years?
Some were successful and some weren't. I had one where we had two acquisition offers. And again, as FCC licensed carrier, we had good international footprint. We had some relationships with big chaebols out of South Korea. They're big multinationals. We had two acquisition offers, and I thought, I've hit the lottery. I've done what you're supposed to do. I built it. I'm going to sell it. One was for, and it doesn't seem like a lot of money now, $9 million. And I was like, okay, that's a good number for somebody in their early 30s.
Of course.
One was for $2.5 million. And I thought, well, $9 million is more than 2.5. I'm going to take the bigger offer. Well, as it turns out, the guys with the lower offer did a public registration, and they've all been retired for a bunch of years. The guys that were doing the $9 million offer, which was more cash and more stock, they ended up not being able to get their finance out of Wall Street together for the transaction. So I was left holding the piece of paper.
Right.
And we had put a lot of money, a lot of expenses out in front of revenues. We were kind of turned upside down in the deal, and it ended up not working out. So that was a hard lesson to learn early, but I learned a ton in going through that.
Oh yeah, there's nothing like making a mistake and I've made plenty of them. And in that market, because you're broadly talking about telecommunications.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that thing was, for context, that was going through tremendous changes in the United States because people, the cellular were breaking off from the hard irons. You had these CLECs, you had all these different little pockets.
A lot of disruption.
A lot of disruption.
And internationally, you can even amplify it more because all of the rest of the telecommunication services globally were controlled by monopoly telcos and had ridiculously high long distance rates, et cetera. And that was the arbitrage that we were playing into. But made a lot of dumb mistakes, learned a lot, and got it right a few times after that, for sure.
And what's the first one that you got right where you said, okay, this one was successful? Successful exit, let's say. I don't know if you exited it, but I'm assuming you did. Did you stay in telco or did you move out of telecommunications?
I had one where we had license rights in an international area that I was able to parlay and make some pretty good money on, where we had secured the rights to be a third operator to compete against the monopoly telcos. So that was more of an arbitrage of having the right connections, working the right international pieces. That worked. Had one where we were doing a mobile middleware solution, and we did a lift out with a company out of New Zealand. They acquired it, and that one was successful. So it's been a number of those along the way that worked pretty well.
So those kind of take us from like the late 90s to the mid 2000s, something like that?
Yeah, to the early 2000s. It was really compressed. For about 6 years there were 5 or 6 different things that I had my fingers in. The very last thing I did before moving back to Arkansas was this joint venture between SAIC and Deutsche Telekom, and that worked well. We stood it up from zero revenue to having a pretty good client base in about a year. But then I had kind of an epiphany. My folks were getting elderly. I'd been away for 20 years. I just felt this compulsion to move back. And so I ended up coming back into the corporate world and worked at American Freightways as a vice president of network and communications. And it was kind of a peer with the CIO. And I stayed through the FedEx acquisition, which created FedEx Freight.
And does that take you back to Arkansas when you do that?
Yeah, that brought us back. That brought us back to north central Arkansas. And then eventually I made my way over here to northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Bentonville area.
Got it. And along the way, were you using private equity capital, or were you guys just using friends and family, or how are you financing
It was some of all of it. The startups, some were it was like corporate VC. So when we did the stuff with Deutsche Telekom and SAIC, that was internally funded to stand that thing up. Some of the other ventures were friends, family, and angels. Some had institutional money. It was a mixed bag. So the one we did that was headquartered in Palo Alto, I stood up the transportation and logistics vertical here, and it had some pretty notable folks that invested in the core business from the Valley. And so it was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag of stuff for sure.
Yeah. The first time I used private equity capital, I think, was in 2002. Might have been in 2001. I can't exactly remember the exact date, but I remember thinking at the time that I really understood it, but now looking back on it, like how much I just didn't really appreciate the shift of, on many levels, I didn't really appreciate it. I didn't appreciate exactly how the transactions worked, what was the most important thing to get right. I also just didn't appreciate just the flow of capital. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand. When you fast forward, what makes you decide to start up, the Startup Junkie and Innovation Junkie? Tell me how does that come into fruition?
Yeah. And I kind of thought had graduated from all of the sort of startup universe. I thought, well, I'm going to check in at the university. I'll run their tech commercialization function. I'll teach a little bit.
And you're full time when you do that? It
was full time. Yeah, I had a typical kind of academic universe title, associate vice provost for research and economic development and director of tech ventures. One of those ridiculously long titles you get there. But when the state program that was really, incited in some ways by Accelerate Arkansas based on a Millikan Institute report that said Arkansas is going to be dead last in every category you want to measure if we don't do more with knowledge and technology-based businesses, that was a catalyst. That created the Innovate Arkansas program. Winrock International was the prime. AEDC was the sort of government sponsor. And that's how I got pulled into that on a part-time basis.
Was Grant doing ADC back then? Is that who was running it back at that time?
Say again, who was
Grant? Grant ran it for a while under BB.
Grant, it was right. Well, yeah, actually, in the very beginning, it was Grant. Before the change in administration, it was under the BB administration when it came out.
When it came out, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because there's an interesting intersection, when you talk to politicians about like what do we do, like how do we help, like and a lot of them are for it, but it's just difficult. And I'll give you some examples here in a second. Sure. But I want to hear more. Like, okay, so you're at the university and you're doing this side venture. It's first. And
it's a side thing, and of course, there's rules on all that, and so you have to deconflict it and say, hey, I'm not going to. It won't interfere with my main duties and whatnot. And that was all great. And we went along for a couple of years, and you could see that things were growing in the state. And at one point, the Northwest Arkansas Council, actually Mike Harvey, who was the COO there and still is, I believe, he came and he said, this is great with what you're doing with Innovate Arkansas. We're seeing all this, but we need to build depth in Northwest Arkansas. We need you to run more events. We need to really energize what we see as being this important part of the state, because there really wasn't much of a venture scene in Northwest Arkansas. And I said, yeah, okay, I can do that. I thought they were asking me to volunteer more time or to spend more time. And they said, and we'll fund it. And I was like, okay. And so that was a whole nother thing. I could begin to stand up some resources, get some things started. We sort of rednecked our way into beginning to run a lot of events, pitch contests, startup weekends, just networking sessions, getting a chapter of 1 Million Cups, which is a Kaufman Foundation deal, put in place. And all of a sudden there's this cadence of activity and things are rolling. And then the next level came and we said, well, if we really want to do this, we've got to do it in an even bigger way. And so we approached the Walton Family Foundation directly, got some additional funding, launched a 501c3 nonprofit as part of that because they're much more comfortable with using that as a mechanism. And at the same time, my son I had brought on board. He's an operator, he's a former Air Force guy. He's a kind of a point A to point B operator. He was successful in getting us lined up to win an SBA Regional Innovation Cluster Award, competitive solicitation nationally. And that put a bunch more money into building the arms and legs of what became Startup Junkie. And this whole crazy idea of you don't want to build the business on the back of startups because they have no money and therefore are terrible customers. But if you can help them get to a point of survivability, it's going to have huge economic impact. That was the story we began to believe and were able to sell multiple times. And so is it,
Jeff, is it a physical location or is it more of a consultancy? You're out there in the universe helping people.
Yes, and I mean, okay. Yes, and we've got a physical headquarters on the Fayetteville Square. We're in the Pryor Center building right on the square. We've got a presence in Bentonville where we run the Fuel Accelerator. It's focused on AM, artificial intelligent machine learning, and also on health tech. We got a physical presence in Conway at the Arnold Innovation Center where we run the Conductor. We've got people on the ground in the lithium play, the Smackover play in Magnolia, and in East Arkansas that runs the 75 Strong program. So we've got folks, 35 to 40 folks total between full-timers, part-timers, contractors, and the intern army. And then a handful of people that are in Seoul, South Korea, because we pipeline in ventures from over there to get enterprise ready in the States.
So basically I can regurgitate. So you got 40-ish plus employees in a couple places in Arkansas and outside the United States, all in service of entrepreneurs broadly. I'm assuming it's not just Arkansas. Is that correct? That's
right. That's right. The big focus on Arkansas, but because we run these federal innovation clusters, we have member companies in the Lithium Regional Innovation Cluster, for example, that are from all over the world and the U.S. So the Ozarks Regional Innovation Cluster focused on retail tech and supply chain, mostly focused in Northwest, but we will help companies where we can make the argument that they've got something that would help one of the big flagship players, Walmart, J.B. Hunt, Tyson, et cetera.
So how does it work? If I'm is it more of like the startup in the sense of I have an idea and I want to be able to take it from concept to creation and I come to you to help do that?
It's every part of the process through probably 25 million in sales, because there's a different, there's a different set of problems that you face. So we have some clients that are concept stage, right? And it's not restricted to just tech. It can be conventional businesses. as well, not just tech companies. But from concept stage to we've had clients now that have kind of grown out of what we do that are 45 million in sales, where I've got a board position or I'm an advisor, and everything in between. And so we're able to help at various different inflection points. And how you do that when you've got a limited staff was we built this cadre of mentors, which were originally pro bono and now are retained SMEs, where if somebody needs some hours from somebody that built and scaled and exited an ed tech, an education tech business, we've got somebody in our network that's done that. And we can align them up for some consultation.
So is it typically dollars for hours? Is that the way that the services work?
Well, remember, and probably didn't say this clearly enough. It's all free.
It's all free. I didn't get that. Okay.
Yeah, because it's free and third party funded, and so it's kind of like. I'm trying to think of a good analogy that wouldn't be pejorative. It's somebody else pays the freight because they can see the economic impact. So what we're measured on is jobs created, venture capital and public money raised, new products, new patents. There's 22 different metrics that we provide to our funding sources, whether they're grants on the nonprofit side or whether they're contracts on the for-profit side.
So you're getting money from, say, the government, various institutes, no government fund?
Federal, state, municipal. The city of Fayetteville is a good partner. University of Central Arkansas is a joint venture partner in Conway.
I see.
So that's the sort of complex layering of funding, which has meant that we have to be really good at bid and proposal stuff for funding, and then have super high service levels so that we're getting good data, but also good testimonials from the entrepreneurial clients that we help.
Does it also create an opportunity for sort of investors in the area to kind of put money to work?
100%. And all the way along, because, if you roll the clock back 17 years, there was exactly one angel fund in the area. There was one SBIC venture group that didn't invest in anything in the state. We had to create some of that along the way. So we did member managed funds. Gravity Ventures, Cleet Brewer and I, who you mentioned, who's now were originally managers on that deal. There's been a number of small kind of boutique funds we built along the way, separate from Startup Junkie. The most recent of which is Cadron Capital Partners. And it's what I'd call a strategic follower, invest in companies that are 2 million in ARR or 4 million in annual sales.
Okay.
Good management teams, good month-over-month growth. We get pulled in a lot of times because of the strategic access we have to some of the big players in the area.
Because you're right. There's really not, like, if I had to think about the funds in Arkansas at the top of my head. So New Roads Capital Partners up in Northwest Arkansas. Yep. I help and work not work for, but work with Firmament, which was formerly McClarty Capital Partners, which is an SBIC fund, and they're on our fourth fund. Of course, Stevens you could say RZC too. Maybe you could say the JB Hunt's family office does a lot of investing, but I don't really. Cauldron are they out of Northwest Arkansas?
No, Cadron is. We've got
offices
both in Central and Northwest. We invest outside the state and inside the state. We took some state small business credit initiative money, very small boutique fund. But we act as a syndicate a lot of times. We'll bring other players together to flesh out bigger rounds. These days, though, you've got Cortado Ventures, which is out of Oklahoma City that has coverage, 46 Ventures out of Tulsa that has coverage in the state, High Street, which is also an SSBCI that has coverage. We still have some gaps in pre-seed and seed, but we're getting better in that sort of seed to A round stage.
And Natural Capital Partners are around too, but they're doing a little more real estate, I would say. But they're that's interesting, because as just a simple like comparison, and this is one of the things I think I think about how we can make Arkansas better. Having access to capital is for sure one of them.
For sure.
I tried to get an office one time down at Old Parkland. Are you familiar with Old Parkland is in Dallas?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's the old hospital where they took Kennedy when he was assassinated. And I don't know this factually. I've been inside that complex, which is pretty amazing. But I understand that there's 150 family offices. And when I think of a family office, I don't know how you think about it, but to me, really to have a family office, a real family office, you're talking about having, in excess of $500 million of capital,
Right.
at least that's how I would define it. And so, and just think about the tremendous capital sitting around there, and so you guys act. So let me see if I can, I'm a would-be entrepreneur. I come to you and I utilize your services in terms of the array of stuff that you said, developing my product, bringing it to market, getting capital, introducing me to people. You guys are sort of the connective tissue out into the broader community. And you've been doing this now for closing in on 20 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. 17 years.
Is there any stats that you've got that I would like how many people you've helped, how many businesses, jobs, anything like that you guys use as?
It's a lot. I mean, the overall impact would be in the billions if you looked at revenues based on the number of ventures helped. 2,000 entrepreneurs a year we have mentoring engagements with. I would say there's probably 150 a year where we really go deep and we do more than just update meetings and that type of stuff where they need more engaged services. But it's a lot. So a couple thousand entrepreneurs, 250 events, a lot of activity.
Interesting. Wow. So, okay, you, with that sort of bird's eye view, is there a thing that you would point to or things that you would say, these are some characteristics of people that become successful entrepreneurs or habits that they have or something along those lines?
Yeah. So I think I'll think of a couple of key people. One is, it starts with the grit and the tenacity to just not give up. That would be one. The stick-to-itiveness, the ability to stay with it. Some people kind of fall in love with the romantic possibility of having their own thing. And then when the cruel reality of the hard work and the grind and the long hours and the low wages for a long time hits them, they're not really up for it.
Right,
so it's
right.
People, they kind of get that check mark. The second, or the best entrepreneurs I've seen, are the ones that are accumulators of information. And it's not to say that they're going to get mentor whiplash because they talk to all the smart people they know and they're kind of spinning around because they don't know what's right. But they're good accumulators of information, and then they can sort of synthesize their version of the truth that works for them. And the ones that do that best will then get back to the people they've taken the guidance from and said, I heard you. I appreciate your input. Here's what I've decided to do, and here's why. And a good example of a guy that's like that is a former student that I had back in 2009. He was the first guy that had a company out of Arkansas that went to Y Combinator, which is the big deal accelerator in the Valley. His name was Ryan Frazier, and he was astute at taking the advice and listening and then synthesizing his version of the truth and then taking action on it and executing. The first business he built after Y Combinator raised money quickly. It was acquired by Simply Measured. Ultimately that ended up not being a good payout for him in the long term or for the investors because of some things that happened in the acquiring company, not things he did. Next thing he did was he was able to get some Bezos money and create Arrived Homes. He's now in Seattle. And that thing is fractionalized real estate play where you can go take, if you're interested in the asset class, you don't want to be a landlord, you can take a fractional interest in these homes that the platform manages. So you can get exposure to it without having to be in the property management. Yeah. Kind of like Acre Trader.
Yeah, I was going to say, is Acre Trader as an example of some guys you worked with?
It's exactly. Yeah, we worked with Carter when he was, he had a laptop and a dream and was just done being in California as a fund manager and decided he was going to launch this thing. I may have been the first or second capital in that deal. And we helped him from early on. And that's another one. He's faced the ups and downs of building that business. But there's another guy that was very astute, tenacity and grit, encyclopedic knowledge of what he was trying to do. He accumulated good people. I think those are the traits. They've got to be coachable, and they've got to come to the conclusion about what the pathway forward is, regardless of this myriad of inputs they get.
So I've invested in a lot of different businesses. I know you don't know all my background, but I've bought and sold lots of companies, and made plenty of mistakes for sure. So how often are you investing in some of these businesses that you're consulting with?
We see probably 1,000 deals a year, all told in reality. Cadron Fund 2 has made 18 investments.
Okay.
I've probably made I've got a portfolio of 90 total that I've made over the last 15 years
Wow.
between the funds and individual investments, some small and some not so small investments.
Would you say they're all venture-ish type of investments? Like, hey, 19 are going to go to zero, but the 20th will do really well.
Early on, for sure. It was portfolio theory and practice to say you're going to have a bunch of zeros, but you're going to have some that are 100x or 1,000x type of return, and they cover all the other sins. Since that time, I've become a little more selective, and it doesn't really have to be a traditional venture business. One of the really great returns I made was in a young guy who I'd had as a student who had a digital background who ended up building a really great HVAC company.
Yeah,
and
those have been fantastic.
In fact, Cadron Fund 3 is going to look really hard at those sort of boring businesses that just make money.
I love those.
Yeah, me too. And that's so we're still we're going to do DoD dual use, and we'll do some of the higher tech stuff, but we're going to have some money allocated for those really interesting businesses that nobody tends to look at frequently.
So Cadron, are you one of the partners at Cadron?
I'm one of the GPs. Brett, who's my son, is a GP. And then Jeff Stanrich, who is our Conway
from Conway. Yeah.
He's a GP.
Interesting.
And we've got a couple of venture partners and a whole legion of interns that help us.
And is that a fund where you have a bunch of LPs, or you're really just syndicating deal by deal?
No, we do. We have LPs. It's a small fund. It's sub $6 million. It's not huge, but we do have a bunch of LPs, high net worth folks.
Well, that sort of deal flow, that's pretty impressive because that gives you the opportunity to see a lot of interesting things and can tell one thing from the next. And, yep. I sometimes also think that leadership is an unlocking mood. Do you sort of have a view on leadership in terms of?
It's huge. And again, that's one of the things you size up when you size up the management teams is the number one asset is, aside from being able to sell investors and sell customers, can they assemble the right team? And if they're not good leaders, they're not going to assemble the right team. They're not going to keep the right team. So I think that leadership part of it is really, really important. And incidentally, being a military guy, you kind of get that drilled into you.
Oh, yeah.
And my business partner is actually educated in that. In addition to being former military, his doctoral work was around executive leadership in general. And so he brings the sort of academic discipline to size people up, behavioral analysis and all that, which is hugely helpful. But yeah, getting the right people in the right seats and leadership roles is really important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that my experience with former folks out of the military has been really positive. It's the same way I sort of think about sports. I mean, when people that go in a team structure, and you're just there's something about that just adds to the overall, the broad portfolio of what they bring to the table, and I do agree with you on the grit too. Just a small little story. So and it's going to sound like I'm picking on paternity leave, and I'm definitely not doing that, but it's going to sound like I'm being critical. This young man who is an Arkansan, went to University of Arkansas, went to graduate school at Duke, and had a great job with a really good company out in California. But he wanted to come back, and he wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he would talk to me every once in a while. And we finally had an opportunity for him. We had this business we were buying. It was a pretty good fit. And I remember and we were going to make him one of the executives of the company. And I remember he called me and he said, well, he's contemplating the whole thing. And he's saying to me, he calls me and says, look, my wife's about to have a child, and here in my company, we have 4 months of paternity leave. And I just want to know what your paternity leave looks like. And of course, and I'm chuckling only because he's going to run the company, and it's a small company. And I said, well, look, you can make up whatever paternity leave you need, and I know it's important to be with your child when they're born, but this company, there is no other you. This is just, and so he took the job. He's done a wonderful job because he's got the grit just to kind of balance it out and just do it. So I do agree with you that you have to be able to, be gritty, right? Because, it doesn't stop. It's a 24-hour sort of gig, for sure.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everyone.
It's one of those things that puts a lot of strain on family and on relationships and all that, huge amount of strain. And you got to be ready for that. There's no work-life balance as an entrepreneur, particularly at times where it's just, you got to be all in order to make it. And that's a lot of commitment. I've been married to the same woman for 41 years at this point. We met when I was at the Naval Academy, and she probably deserves sainthood because it was rough. It was rough at some of those points, but you got to have the right kind of relationships, and it makes a lot of difference if you do, for sure.
So, okay, I'm curious about two more things. One is, can you tell me about a failure? Like, tell me about, like, I thought I had it, but boy, I know you said some stuff earlier, but is there a good story where you're like, I really thought I had this nailed down, and oops, no, I didn't.
The main one, the big one, the only one that was really consequential and kind of life changing was, and in fact, we call that those of us who are involved call that FCT. It was called FCT Telecom. We call it FCT University.
Yes.
Because we all got PhD level wisdom. And all ended up not making a cent, and some of us, it was really probably pretty disastrous financially.
Right.
And as the captain of the ship, I went down with that ship. When that acquisition offer failed, it was the lowest of the lows. But what I always tell people is, if you can survive that, having something that really didn't work out, where you were all in, and then rebuild, and not lose your self-respect, and maintain relationships. You're going to have that at some point in a career as a serial entrepreneur. You're going to have something that's not going to work out, and you're going to have to kind of swallow your pride and just put your pants back on, put your boots on, and get back to work. And so I was able to do that. I'm not saying that there wasn't a period of time where I wasn't in a funk and wondering, how long am I going to be radioactive? What am I going to do next? What's the next thing? But it was one of those things that I think builds resilience. Quite honestly, if that first venture had worked like it looked like it was going to work, if we had sold that, I probably would have ended up being an awful person. It would have been too much for us at too early of an age for me. And so that kind of injected some humility where I think I was maybe a little more realistic, not any more cautious, but learned some really good lessons.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I was on the precipice. There's so much to it, but the simple way for anybody to understand it is I was about to make a lot of money for me, and then like it just like a snap of a fingers, it just vanishes. And you have all of this expectation that gets built up with you and your team, especially in that early days where we were I was foolish enough to count my chickens before they hatched. And I would describe it afterwards. It like there was like a period where you're just sort of stunned, and then when it sinks in on the team, not everybody perseveres through all that. There's some people that they just don't take it as well. Okay, here's my last thing I'm curious about, and I'm not trying to get you to be controversial or anything. I'm just curious if you got a view on it. So often, and this is where if you have one. So there's things that I think that our government does well, and there's things that I think that they don't do well. And I'm not necessarily trying to pick on people per se. I'm not trying to be Republican or Democrat about the whole thing, but I have certain views about like, okay, we could do this a little better. And I'm just curious if you have a perspective about like the things that like the state of Arkansas or even the federal government that they could do more of or less of to make, to drive the engine a little forward.
Yeah. Well, obviously, within reason, less regulation is probably a good thing. And I'm not talking about no regulation, but less regulation on business formation. And I'll give you a kind of a perfect case in point. So there's the accredited investor rules, which have been around since the 1970s, which kind of grew out of Depression era thinking that private businesses and people raising money were going to be a bunch of hucksters that were going to try to steal from little old ladies, their lives. And so the government kind of plays our daddy in that role. It doesn't matter which administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, these rules have been around forever. And they're like, well, you can invest in public markets because supposedly you have access to information, but private businesses, you can't unless you're an accredited investor, $200,000 a year or more for 2 subsequent years, over $1 million, doesn't include your house. And so quite honestly, when we started to work on some of this policy stuff, I went to war on that point. I said, the intellectual hypocrisy associated with the fact that I can go to the horse track, or go to the Cherokee Casino and blow every cent I have, and nobody's there to stop me at the door to see if I'm an accredited gambler, versus I can't invest in a local business or any business that's private unless I'm accredited. So that's one where they need to get rid of those rules altogether. There's still rules against fraud, against misrepresentation. There's still all those kinds of protections that make sure that you shouldn't get the shaft. You still need to buyer beware and do your diligence. But that's one where I think we're finally getting to the point. The state's already done something about it. So there's legislation in Arkansas that says for Arkansas-based investors in Arkansas companies, the federal accreditation rules don't apply because that's only an interstate thing. And so you can invest now. If you don't meet the federal accreditation rules, you can still invest in a private company in Arkansas. That's a good move there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that because, one of the things I would always say to people when I was talking about just like, if you have such limited publicly traded companies and you have, money in your 401k and you have a company down the street that you really want to invest in, you don't have the ability to do that, right? And so many, for a while I would use the example of Uber. I would say, Uber's great, you're using it, but you can't invest in it, right? Because, and I even think things like, and I can pick on things on both sides. So I freely pick on stuff on both sides. But like when they passed the Corporate Transparency Act a year ago, where like you need the FinCEN number, and
totally ridiculous.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. It's like TSA for small business. And if you're not an entrepreneur and you don't have any businesses, you just have no idea what this is. And so you think, and I'm sure someone selling it would say, wow, look, these 10 frauds over here, if we had this process, we would never have had those frauds. And that may be true, but like to layer in a bunch more steps, even if they seem small, is just adds cost, adds friction, and brings down innovation, in my opinion.
Well, it was classic. And those of us who have LLCs were like, well, are we exempt? Or are we not exempt? Do we have to do it or we don't have to do it? And we're asking, the lawyers didn't know. We're asking for all these opinions. And so thankfully, they kind of got rid of that. That's sort of the last. But I got to tell you something. You start to look at the penalties. It's like, oh my God, it's like $500 a day to $5,000.
That's exactly.
If you don't file, and
it's crazy. Like I don't know who comes up with this. Somebody who's never been an entrepreneur.
A classic example of some inspired accountant technocrat sitting inside the Beltway saying, "Gee, this would be a good idea." Yeah. So that can. I'll give you one more example. Not to harp on it too much. The opportunity zone idea. The idea of opportunity zones. Great idea. Great idea. You want to have local investment by local investors in these places that have been bad census tracts where there hasn't been a lot of local. You want to reinvigorate them. Well, they set it up to where it was so complicated that you needed an army of lawyers and accountants to understand it, and it was only to shield capital gains versus ordinary income, which means 99 and 9/10% of all the people that were in those local areas that might want to invest in a local barbershop or restaurant or some other kind of operating business had no opportunity to do it. It was the same people that had all the money. And it was so damn complicated, those of us that might have capital gains exposure didn't want to do it because we didn't understand it. So if they had changed those opportunity zones to say, anyone can invest, forget the accredited investor rules, and you can shield ordinary income versus capital gains, it would have opened that whole thing up in a real material way. Well-intended, not well thought out.
Yeah, there's so many. We could just keep going on and on. Jeff, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate all the stuff that you do. I need to come up there and see that. Absolutely. When I start teaching up there, assuming this class takes, I assume it's going to take. But I'm excited about. My father, after he retired, taught for a decade, and he worked at the Coca-Cola company and was passionate about marketing and loved Coca-Cola. And so I'm passionate about starting businesses. So I'm hoping to pass that on. So I need to maybe get some advice from you.
Yeah, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. Anything I can do to help at any time, come by and see me. We're not far from the U of A. I would love to spend some more time. Excellent.
Well, great. Thank you very much for listening. And you can check out all of our information on freearkansas.com and all of our other media channels. Jeff, we'll call that a wrap.
Thanks very much. It's great.